Welcome back, investor. We've got another episode of Passive Income Adventures, the show where we tell you to go take more adventures, and then we put people, guests, my experience, their experience on here to help you figure out how to pay for your adventures. So a big thing that we do on the show is investing in private markets. And what you're going to see when you start investing in like your buddy's tech company, a big institutional type of raise for a larger company, maybe pre-IPO type of raise, any kind of real estate deal where they're wanting to invest in their apartment building or their flipping business or whatever it is, you're going to be presented with a lot of information to make your investing decisions, kind of like the old days of the stock market where they mail you the prospectus, which you can still ask for, but we'd be kind of piling through it like, I don't really know how to read this, what information I'm looking for. And so the pitch deck is the source of that in private market investing. And pitch decks, I'm a pitch deck designer. Like if I have any technical expertise, that's probably like my biggest one. I'm a former photographer, graphic designer, and I have done pitch decks for various companies, catalogs, things like that for many years. And so I am all about like tearing apart the pitch deck, because when you're tearing apart a spreadsheet or something like that, you might not have access to the spreadsheet. They keep that maybe behind doors, and then you get that and it's a total overwhelm. But the pitch deck, if well done, should be able to give you the information that you need. And if it's a good company that just has a bad deck, you don't want to dismiss it just because the deck is bad. So our guest today is Avi Solomon, who has a newer way of communicating what investors need to know with not only the pitch deck technology, like I'm a PowerPoint, like Google Slides kind of deck designer, and you get a big PDF. It's like reading an ebook, right? But for something that's not only more interactive and tech-based and more forward as far as that goes, but also the information, the communication, like the storytelling, like why are we doing this? Who are we doing it with? What kind of returns can we expect? Timelines, like all of that information that we need isn't just this dry deck. It has a story arc that good marketers can convey to their potential investors. And also good marketers can convey bad investments through these same kinds of psychological techniques. And so being able to pile through a pitch deck, see what's missing, what's important, and ultimately that should be your top level guide of investing in a company or not. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the first things and one of the main things you're gonna be looking at. So today joining us, Avi Solomon, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Emma. It's good to be here.
So we first met when you were doing capital raising at a firm where you were helping people like me raise capital from maybe beyond the retail investor, like the one-to-one, like I'd be raising capital from a single family, but you would have more institutions, maybe family offices or ultra high net worth individuals that people like me were trying to get out for our deals. And so that's how we first met. But then you came back to me later and you're like, hey, pitch decks suck. Can I share with you something I've been working on? And I already knew, my husband's an IT guy. We invest heavily in this kind of tech companies. And so I knew that this PDF PowerPoint thing was going away, but it's funny, the tech company we're invested in with most heavily, they hired me to do their pitch decks and their presentations. And I already knew like this is going the way of the dinosaur. So I'm super excited about what you've been working on the last couple of years and excited for you to share it with our guests. So there you go. Take it away, Avi. Tell us about your background, how you came up with the idea, some of your pivot points and turning points, and then we'll start talking about pitch decks in general and what investors need to know to be better consumers of pitch decks.
Okay, so I really appreciate it, Emma. I'll start like this, and you can kind of direct me as you wish. Whatever's interesting to you, because I can bang on about this kind of thing all day. So,
Yeah.
as you say, I was a capital raiser. I used to raise institutional capital for commercial real estate deals. I was the head of capital markets in my previous firm, as you mentioned, and the primary struggle that I personally kept running into, and my clients very much so as well, when you send a PDF to investors, right? Especially a PDF that is poorly designed, but honestly, even a PDF that is well designed, you're essentially running into kind of a fundamental problem already.
Yeah.
Right? Which is that people hate reading. It's just that simple, right? Investors are people too, and everyone hates reading, right? I mean, a little stat for you is people spend approximately 15 minutes a day reading literature, right? That's kind of adults in America spend about 15 minutes a day. Reading, they spend approximately 2.5 hours a day scrolling. Okay. So yeah, I know it's kind of ridiculous and it's a bit sad, if I'm honest. But our brain is not designed to want to read information. Our brain, however, is designed to consume content. And so essentially what I said was, why on earth do we have, why are we sending these long pieces of literature to investors, asking them to read 50, 60, 70 pages worth of information, when really what we should be sending them is something that is much more akin to a scrolling experience,
Okay.
right? Something that is dynamic, that is interesting, that is interactive, that might actually grab their attention, right? And so, when I say I was banging my head against the wall, I kept sending these PDF decks to these institutional investors, and a very annoyingly large amount of time, even if I had a relationship with the group or whatever it is, they just weren't reading the information.
Yeah.
And and I was bugging them to try, please, can you read the information? Just open it, for goodness sake. And essentially their answer was, something to the effect of, why the heck would I open a 50-page document and read through a 50-page document if, I've decided that I'm not going to invest, based on the subject line, right?
Yeah.
I have to make a decision extremely early as to whether or not it's even worth opening the document. And as I say, like I was, it made my life miserable, at least from a capital raising perspective.
Yep.
And I realized, like, we have to make this much more interactive, much more interesting, much more dynamic. So we came up with the concept of the interactive deck, which essentially borrows a number of ideas and a number of technologies from social media, right? By which I mean, it's very simply kind of three simple concepts, which are attention, i.e. things move, things, you can click on things, you can watch videos, you can scroll through various different yeah, carousels, and and graphs, and everything's interactive. And that's kind of the attention piece. The second piece is what we call access, right? You mentioned this briefly, which is that you want to be able to access the information that you want, if you're an investor. However, significantly, you want to also be able to ignore the information that you don't want,
Yep.
right? And so if you're hit by, and you need to be able to pass out the, in order to be able to pass the information through that test that you described at the beginning, right? If you're a keen investor and you have a keen eye, you need to be able to, zoom in on the things that are of interest to you, and be able to ignore the things that that aren't so relevant, that kind of marketing fluff, or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so as an investor, you need access, right, to the information, as clearly as possible. What we like to say is we give people access to explore and the right to ignore. That's kind of our little tagline. And then the final one is what we call action, which is really interaction. And that's the idea that people can actually do a lot more by way of, like, almost integrating apps, as it were, into the deck. So things like chatting with, so you as the investor, you can submit a question to the to the GP, or to whoever's presenting you this deal. You can submit a question directly through the deck. You can book a call with them directly through the deck. You can challenge assumptions. So we kind of inbuild calculators into it, whereby you as the investor can kind of challenge an assumption that an investor or that the GP has presented. So they think that they'll be able to, and I'm using a commercial real estate example over here, sell at a 6% exit cap rate. And you say, well, 1 second, what happens if you don't get that good a cap rate? Like, maybe you get a slightly worse cap rate, a 6.5% cap rate. What would happen then to your returns, to IRR, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So all of that is to say that interactivity is crucial, and being able to kind of integrate all of this cool stuff into a deck just totally changes the game in terms of strong communication with investors.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes. I mean, okay. As a designer, I'm trying to think of, like, how we can talk about this without getting too nerdy technical in the weeds. But I do think that the investor kind of needs to hear some of the nerdy technical, because they're being asked to make very large decisions based on, like, this wall of PDF slides. So now you remind me of something, like when I was finally had kind of made the decision that I was going to learn how to play the piano. Okay, so bear with me, this analogy here. And somebody asked me, they found out that I was kind of playing, and they're like, "Hey, can you accompany this children's choir at church?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." Right. And so they're like, I've heard you. I know you can do it. It was a friend of mine, and she was looking for a substitute. And so she prints me out the music, and I start playing it, and it was just a nightmare. It was a disaster. I'm like, "There's no way I can do this." And she goes, "You don't have to play all the notes." I was like, "Oh yeah." It's like, oh, and it started kind of all of a sudden it started clicking. So I started trying to ignore the notes, but I couldn't unsee them. They're little black dots on the page, and there were like 4 or 5 of them that at a time. And I just felt very overwhelmed by it. And so one day I just got out a thing of whiteout. I just started whiting out the notes that I didn't feel like really added to that experience, like, and didn't need to be there to be accompanied, and just making the music easier for and customizing to my level. So freedom to explore the music in a way that I'd never done before, while I was ignoring, and I needed the whiteout to be able to get rid of it. But now over the years, I've developed an ability to unsee, and I don't have to white things out anymore. But if I have a really difficult piece of music, I still will get out the whiteout and do that. So it's kind of a similar type of thing that you're talking about. I don't know how many musicians we have listening, but that same idea, being able to curate your own information and customize the experience to your own skill level and your own set of priorities. A similar kind of idea.
Exactly. If I may, there are really two I would say categories of investor. The they're crudely kind of put as sophisticated and unsophisticated investor.
Yeah.
I don't believe in that. I believe that everyone is sophisticated. I think it's kind of ridiculous to say that, like, there's an architect who's an unsophisticated investor, or a lung doctor who's an unsophisticated investor, even though they might not know the intricacies of a commercial real estate deal or a private equity deal. So I would kind of put it more as like an experienced investor and an inexperienced investor. But either way, there are two types of investor, generally speaking, and it's exactly as you say, where the person who wants lots of information, and wants to have that full sheet of music, can access it by way of clicking little buttons or click-throughs that we provide on basically every slide of the deck, which are things like additional data, right? So we'll have data that backs up the hypothesis within the slide. So let's just say, we'll have a returns slide that will say, these are your expected returns, your IRR, equity multiple. Again, I'm kind of nerding out on the commercial real estate side of things. My apologies. But then you can have a little button that says something like, well, how did you get there? Right.
Yes.
And that button you can click. Exactly. If you're a little bit more experienced, perhaps, or you're a bit more interested in how that conclusion was arrived at, that you can find. However, you don't, in order to understand the sheet music, and what song is being played, you just need kind of those core notes, as you to kind of continue the analogy that you've been describing. So to kind of finish it off, maybe that would be the analogy and how it flows in.
What was that? I haven't seen this in years, but it was like this presentation software I think it was called Prezi, Prezi, where it was like it would zoom in and zoom out according to the user. So it was kind of like an interactive PDF where you could make a slide deck, but then you could zoom back out to see the map, and it was like clustered in almost like subjects and chapters. And I just remember the first couple of times I saw that, I'm like, this is going to take over the world. And then it didn't. It just kind of went away, and then we went back to the static PDF again. But what you're saying is going to be more like a web-based experience, more like what we might have seen years ago with something like Prezi, where we're moving our way through at our own pace. Now, I see a couple of problems with this, and I'll just list them out, and maybe we can address them as you see. Okay, problem one: as a pitch deck designer, I need to have the story arc. It's like a piece of music where I'm starting at the beginning and I'm ending up at the end, and it's going to build, and it's going to come off, and it's going to resolve, and all of this storytelling kind of thing. It's very psychological, and the investor can start to feel psychologically manipulated if there's too much of this marketing arc. However, it is very important to connect emotionally with the investor because nobody invests on logic. They invest on emotion. We do everything on emotion. I had a guest on, I don't know, a month or two ago who basically challenged the neuroscience is showing us we're emotional beings. And we tried to say that we're logical and it's just not there. So losing the ability for me to control that story arc, I don't know how I would translate that to an interactive. This is almost like making a video game, choose your own adventure. That my mind just doesn't think that way. It thinks more in chronological, linear fashion. So that's one problem. Do we want to tackle these one at a time, or should I make a list and then come back to them?
Let me tackle this one because I love that you brought it up. And
Okay,
this concept of story arc is something that has fascinated me for a very long time. And I think it's just an amazing concept. Because there's a very significant difference that people conflate two types of story. Okay. You know, and the way that the crass way perhaps of like of kind of illustrating this is a deck, right, is supposed to have, you know, generally speaking, no more than kind of 10, 20 words per page, right? That's kind of the you know the original pitch deck rule, right?
Yeah.
But it's also supposed
That's
to be a
why they're
story.
50 pages. It's because there's hardly anything on the page. It's all filler and white space and fluff. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
Exactly, right? But there's a, you know, the funny thing is that there's a word for a story that has 10, 20 words per page, right?
Okay.
And we call those children's stories,
Yeah.
right? If you ever read your kids' books, like, okay, that's how many pages you're gonna have, right?
See
If Harry Potter, yeah, exactly. If Harry Potter had,
for those of you watching on video, he just brought up Harry Potter. He just went there.
I have to, you know, my accent requires it.
Yes.
You know, if Harry Potter was 10 words per page, it probably wouldn't have sold 600 million copies, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The point is we conflate this concept of story, right? So the question is, what do we mean when we say story when it comes to something like a pitch deck or a deal? And it really is that we use the framework that a story uses, right? And that's what we mean when we say story. And what is the framework? It basically is, right, what, how, why. That's the, you know, and the kind of slightly more sophisticated way of saying that is result, method, and motivation.
Okay.
That's what every story is made up of.
Yes.
Right? It's this kind of ingredients in a story. And if you think about, I don't know, a murder mystery, right? We know the result. Then we have to figure out we know what happened. The question is, how did it happen? And then, you know, we want to understand the motivation. We want to understand the characters within that story and what their motivation was, right? But ultimately, every story, and you can kind of pick out different stories, and some of them slightly change the order. They do, you know, how, what, why. But either way, every story essentially has that three-pronged set of ingredients to, you know, to be the story framework.
Okay.
And that is what your pitch deck needs to have, right?
Okay.
It needs to have this is the result, i.e., we're going to make, you know, generally speaking, we're going to make a lot of money. That's kind of the, you know, the pitch that you're going to get great returns, or you're going to, you know, have financial freedom through this, whatever exactly the result that you want. Then there's the how of like, what's the mechanism? How is this project, this company, you know, going to be able to deliver those results? And then there's more of a why question. And that's where things get a little bit more intriguing, right? And kind of, you know, and that's where like the story side of things really take hold. And if you're a brilliant storyteller, you get to tell people why this company, you know, what's the motivation of this company? Why does this company make your emotions tingle? You know, to kind of bring back the idea that you said before, that like emotions are the driver. So that's what we mean when we say story.
Okay. Well, I mean, as someone who grew up on long form stories before audiobooks, they came in cassettes, right, when I was a kid. And so I think in this kind of linear fashion, and I'm already seeing, okay, well, the storytelling devices that you use, you have to have those three elements, right? But I'm already like, no, you want the why before you get to the how, because if they don't care about the how, they don't know. So I'm already seeing it in a different order than you're telling it, and how you have to keep injecting a little bit of why, then some how, then a little bit more why, then some how, because if it's all why and they're like, yeah, I get it, like, tell me how, like, you have to really be able to deliver in a way that the investor is emotionally ready to take it. And in a static deck, there's no way you're going to be able to make everybody happy. So the story arc can still be
Yeah.
there if I personally can unlock myself from this chronological beginning to end way that with music and with books, that's like, that's the way that I do things. And I get distracted by side plots and I don't know how they fit back into the main narrative. Like this is a struggle for me personally, but I wonder with older investors, because most of us are in our 50s, right? 50s and 60s when we're looking at putting significant amounts of money into these kinds of things. Like we all think that way because that's the media that we had growing up. I was like the first video game generation, right? So the Atari and the original Nintendo, like we don't think in these bubbles, we think in plot lines. And so I think the adoption there is going to be a little bit of an issue. And here's another issue that why this adoption might be challenging is because one of the things I've noticed when we give people our big deck or we give them a link to the data room, they can look at as much or as little information as they want, but because there's a lot of information available, they feel like they have to look at all of it and understand all of it, or they're not qualified to invest. And that's more of a beginner problem. Experienced investors are better at not needing to white the notes out. They can just see the whole thing and know what's important and what's not important. But for people who still need the notes whited out, they are overwhelmed because it's like, oh my goodness, I click and there's just more stuff here. And I'm like wondering like, what have I missed? Like, I don't feel qualified to do this because it's not presented in this easy to consume linear fashion. They might feel like, I don't even know that there's stuff in here that I've missed.
Right. So I think, and I love that you said that because I think it actually answers a previous question that you had about Prezi and why Prezi never really took off. This concept that like you can zoom out and you can then click into various different, the area that you want to explore, because it doesn't provide a linear chronology. It doesn't provide an actual arc. Now, what we've done, which is significantly different, by way of kind of layout, is that we have, one thing then the next. That's essentially how we structure it. So we have, the first slide is the first slide. You can skip if you want to the next paragraph or the next slide or the next section, whatever it is. However, there is an arc, right? And it's more like if you want to delve deeper into the story and you want to find out more information about the story and how all the pieces add up together, then you can continue to click in, right? But it's kind of like, and to kind of give you maybe a granular example, we'll make a hypothesis. You get up to the market section and be like, this is an amazing market for this product that we're that we're providing as a company. And so we'll say, the market conditions are perfect. Okay. And and we might give 2 or 3 pieces of evidence for that. We'll say, I don't know, the growth, the continued growth in this sector is fantastic, and there's high demand and low supply, and also, I don't know, the interest rates, make it such that it's good. Whatever, I'm making stuff up.
Yeah.
And and then we have a little button that says, something like "Tell me more," right? About each of these things individually or about the whole thing as a whole. And that "Tell me more" will provide a graph that shows you that the growth is indeed, the way that we're kind of suggesting, all right? Kind of, it that shows the same conclusion that we've come to, right? And it will source it on, with some credible source. And similarly to the next thing, whatever, I forget exactly what it is. The supply demand, right? And you can provide the data for it. Point is, you can provide these additional pieces of evidence that layer onto the story, but you will continue to get that initial story arc in the right order, with the structure, with the layout that was intended by kind of the thought through team that does deck designing. I will mention that we, and I mentioned this to you before, Emma, we don't see ourselves as a tech company. We see ourselves as a communications company, right? The game here is, or the challenge here is to communicate the complex ideas with cutting edge clarity. That's our tagline as a company. We communicate complex ideas with cutting edge clarity. The reason that we have tech and the reason that we develop this tech is because it allows us to communicate with that much greater levels of clarity, right?
Yeah.
If the tech, didn't, then we would ditch the tech, right? Our goal as a company is to improve communication.
Yeah.
And so, the story arc is absolutely crucial in this whole thing. It's the goal is for people not to get lost in the tech. The tech is only to make things clearer, cleaner, easier for people. I think, as I say, I think that's where Prezi got a little bit lost, is they made things complex and cool, and their animations are awesome. But that ultimately that's what they are. They're animations. They're not communication devices.
Okay. It's kind of like an educational video on YouTube that's using a lot of like whiz bang and special effects and B-roll. And you're like, just this
Yeah,
is not actually educating me more on this
exactly.
topic. So
Exactly.
and so I think what you're saying is like let's take a movie or a book that we're used to going through, and when somebody first opens a pitch deck, the death by PDF traditional style of pitch deck, they're already not going to be approaching it like a novel or a movie. Especially when I'm with somebody in person, the deck becomes more interactive because I'm there and they're asking questions and I'm flipping to that page, but we're not reading it from front to back. And so with the piece of music, when I'm preparing, I open up the music and I just scan the whole thing. And then, because I've got to figure
Yeah.
out, do I know the song already? Like, what's the deal? And then I will look for sections. We're looking for like where it's building, where it's falling, like difficult sections, key changes. I'm looking for like these certain things that I want to be prepared
Yeah.
for. Then I will flip back to the beginning, start figuring it out, like getting the melody. Then I have to go back to the beginning, start adding in some chords. So I'm doing this in this layered, iterative approach that you're not going to watch a movie or read a novel in that same way. It's spoilers, right? You have to start at the beginning and at the end. But pitch decks, people are already consuming it more like a piece of music where they're going back through it in layers. And it's already more personal when I'm presenting it to somebody either on a video call or in person than it would be if I just gave them the deck and told them to read it. And so you're just trying to make that experience of how I would be delivering it more, it's almost like more realistic in a way, because it's more natural to how I would present it if I was sitting next to them. Here's the information, but it doesn't have to be consumed in any particular order or any particular way, and it's more customizable the way I would be in person.
Correct. Well, I'll say mostly to your point, is that what we can integrate is video. And the
Mhm.
beauty of being able to integrate video is that you can be there explaining what you want to explain without being there, right?
Yes.
And we have the chat feature which enables people to communicate with you again without you necessarily being there. So
Mhm.
yes, I will always believe that if you're talking to someone face to face, that is the highest form of communication that you could have, right? You're not going to be able to replace that with a document or even an interactive document. However, the having interactivity is really the next best thing, and the ability for you to explain what's going on in video form, to be able to kind of lead people down your thought process, but also be able to go on tangents. It's kind of the way that you would talk is like
Yeah, like this
I'm
one.
starting from here and I want to get to here. I'll go on tangents along the way if you're interested. Like you tell me what you're interested in, stop me, and I'll go on a tangent. And that's kind of the way that we try and formulate this.
Right.
Is you get to press a button whenever you say 1 second, show me the evidence. 1 second, let me understand this better. You can click a button to kind of say that.
Yeah, but as a presenter, I can say that's coming. We're going to get into that, and being able to put the guardrails on, I think is important when they're all the information is
Yeah,
coming. Also, being able to zoom out and see the entire thing and be like, I'm not going to give them a link to my data room with every property report, every tax bill, everything, but they are going to have varying depths that they're going to go in already. I'm going to be in a very
yeah,
short, like maybe even a one pager. And then when they're like, yeah, I'd like more information, I give them the deck, then they really need more. And I'm like, okay, there's some stuff in the data room that's pretty heavy, but you know what you're doing. So we'll go ahead and give you
exactly.
access to these documents, but then they have to ask for it at every step along the way. This is reminding me of what we did with our PPM and our pitch deck with Google LM. We loaded up all of our stuff into Google LM and we had it turn our PPM into a podcast. Now we never distributed this to people because that's a legal document that we want to make sure like its fidelity is very important there. But for the pitch deck, it was
Yeah,
really interesting because it turned our pitch deck into an audiobook that they could listen to in a podcast style. And we can't put our own voices in yet, but I mean, this kind of stuff is becoming kind of incredible. And it took the burden off me as a designer, because when you're talking about all these extra assets, I'm thinking all this extra work, because creating this is incredibly time consuming and tedious. But then we stick into the Google LM or NotebookLM, and it's not ready for prime time by any means. But it was very interesting to see kind of like where this is going, and how all this extra content that I'm like, oh man, I got to create all these video sales letters and all of these, I had just even designing in that space, like, is overwhelming to me. But at the same time, it's like, look at all that we can do. So because people are still getting death by PDF walls of pitch decks, and they're not all impulse, and we're going to be in this PDF world for decades yet to come. I mean, mission driven founders like you are like, oh, I want to change this, right? But we're old. We do things our way. How can someone look at a deck that they get that's not in a pulse format, because that's what mostly we're going to be looking at, right, for many years to come? How can we use the tools?
2 or 3.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years, yes. Where we're able to say, hey, how do I use this? Like, we're already loading it into ChatGPT or Gemini or Google Notebook or Google, what's that called? NotebookLM. We're already loading it into these things, doing so. How can people kind of take what they've been given and force it into this more user-friendly, interactive, just give me what I need to know type of thing? Have you ever, I don't know if you've ever, because I mean, it's almost like, well, how can people bypass Pulse altogether? No, what we're talking about is it's a workaround for something that is more thoughtfully designed, that is like a interim type of coping mechanism.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I don't necessarily have the right answers, because if I had them, this in Pulse in many ways was the solution to that exact question. But significantly, Pulse comes in at the very beginning, right? The entire communication form that that a PDF takes, and that versus an interactive deck is just kind of fundamentally different. And so we come in from the very beginning. We basically talk to founders and and general partners and say, let's communicate your idea in a way that people actually want to be able to absorb it, and can absorb it in this really clean, clear, interactive format. And so how do you wrap your mind around all literature? I hate to say it, but like I don't have a great answer for you. The answer is the same way you have in previously. You skim through it, you try and kind of pick up what you're interested in and read those paragraphs. You manually do the thing that that Pulse is designed to allow you to do with with real ease and access. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Well, I mean, because obviously you designed a tool because it's lacking. But let's say a founder comes to you and they say, hey, we have this great pitch deck that we got designed by a wonderful pitch deck designer. Her name is Emma. She's amazing, right? And they give you this PDF.
It's wonderful. I've met her.
Yeah. There you go. Oh, wow. She does great work. We can make it better. So do they oftentimes have existing marketing materials that they'll bring into you, and then you're able to take what they already have and get the journey started with the PDF?
Yes.
Does it start there?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. If the pitch deck designer is a really good one, as Emma absolutely is, then then you've created some degree of story arc, right? And as I was saying before, the thought process that goes into kind of creating your story arc, and what exactly the results that you want to provide, what exactly is the method, what exactly is the motivation that kind of serves as the structure for your story that you're telling in your deck, is something that a really strong deck designer, even if they're working in PDF or PowerPoint, will ask you, right? And will get through with you. What we then do is kind of take that to the next level and say, okay, now what are the really core assets and really core pieces of information within that, and what can you, and what do you put behind a discovery button, right? And that's the kind of core difference. We then kind of go into the various different assets that you can add, things like videos, like we discussed, and things like interactive graphs, and we implement the chat feature, and the calls to action are much more interactive and stuff like that. But yes, if you've created a PDF for your company, for your deal, for your project, and it's you know, it has data and it has information and it has, you know, some kind of story arc, then that's definitely the place to start for sure.
Okay. But people don't need a pitch deck designer. They can go straight to you with just raw data, and you can help them kind of put
Yeah.
together those visuals and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I want to bring it back to how this impacts the limited partner, because
Yeah.
a new deck reader is going to feel like, where am I being manipulated? Where am I being information is being withheld from me? How is this story being presented in a way to make this look like an amazing opportunity? But I don't know how to dig deeper to see if any of this hyperbole is even true. And so there's this lack of trust there. I'll just put this out there myself. If you don't know how to read a deck, don't invest in the deal. I just made it easy for you. If you don't understand what's going on and you feel like you might be being manipulated, or that maybe it's a great deal and you have FOMO, then, you know, if FOMO is not a reason to invest, you need to learn how to do due diligence on this. The first time she set this music in front of me and said, I think you can play this, I was like, I can't play it. And it was a disaster, right? And so it took me iterations to learn how to do this. And I will tell you that reading a pitch deck and even reading a PPM is way easier than learning to read music. So if you have any kind of creative or technical skill, coding, okay, it's easier than coding. It's easier than writing a novel, right? Like, if you have some technical skill, you can learn to read a pitch deck, you can learn to read a spreadsheet, you can learn to read a PPM. But if you cannot read it and you don't feel confident, just don't invest. So let's just get that out of the way right now. But what are some ways that limited partners can look at these kinds of materials and be able to tease out what they need? I mean, experience obviously is the best one, right? But what kinds of things do you see people trying to hide in decks or misrepresent in decks where you're like, this isn't that you're you see a lot of inexperience try to mask as experience. I bet you see a lot of things.
100%.
So kind of give us some of the red flags that investors need to be watching for to be like, yeah, I'm done looking at this, or wow, this is intriguing, I should dig in more. Green flags.
Yeah, the main one is what I call the golden rule of communication, which is if someone is telling you how to feel, then that's a problem, right?
Okay.
And that, by the way, goes both ways. You know, so if I tell you something like, you know, this deal is going to be so is going to make you feel over the moon, or like, you know, or something. I'll give you a better example. If I say to you, we are the most trustworthy group that you've ever worked with,
Mm-hmm.
red flag,
Okay.
right? If someone is telling you how to feel, then that's a problem. What they need to be providing you is with really hardcore evidence for things, and then you make up your own decisions based off of that. Now
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of just rule number one, because the easiest thing to manipulate, as we mentioned earlier on, in this conversation, is your emotions, right? And so if someone is playing to your emotions directly, that is something that you need to just be aware of. Now, it's not to say that necessarily the deal is a terrible deal,
Mm-hmm.
but it is to say that they're not presenting you with the thing that you need, you know, with the actual ingredients here. They're kind of, you know, they're not presenting you with the cake, they're presenting you with the icing.
Yeah.
Like you need, you know, you need to know that there's a real cake there. And that's kind of number one. The next thing is, when it comes to a deal, the primary thing that can be manipulated is numbers. And if, you know, if you're honest, numbers are always a manipulation of some sort, because they're predictions of the future, right? Within a commercial real estate deal, you know, which is just, I keep banging on about that because that's kind of my background, but
That's
we
very, yeah, that's
deal
very
with all sorts of deals. We deal with all sorts of deals where the numbers, you know, are projections, right? Because ultimately any investment is a projection. You know, and if I'm putting together a deal and I come to you and I say, we're going to make you know, $1 million profit over the course of a year, first of all, any kind of like guarantee or you know, overconfidence is in and of itself a problem. But even that, even without, you know, the guaranteeing, I say we project that we're going to make, you know, $1 million in profit, or you know, you're gonna see a 25% IRR, or you're gonna double your money, or any of those kinds of things. Those are ultimately, that's the result, right? And so when you know, again, when I say that the story is made up of result, method, and motivation, you need to understand that if you just have the result, and you don't know the method, or you don't have a way of really challenging the method
Yes.
and scrutinizing the method very clearly,
Yes.
then then you don't know how they got there, right? It could be that they've fudged the numbers. It could be that they have crazy wild assumptions baked into that, baked into it, or it could be that they're actually under promising, and maybe it's a ridiculously good deal, and they're actually maybe even underplaying it.
I've
So
seen that a lot. They want to under promise and over deliver, and so the under promising makes it look like meh, a mediocre deal that could be actually a really good deal. So being able to see through that,
yeah,
I think, is important, because you're going to see inflations on both ends of that. Oh
yeah,
goodness, yeah. One thing I really noticed is through our different kinds of investing in kind of startup tech versus boring businesses like the car wash, okay, and
yeah,
then real estate plays. I see a big difference in the numbers that are coming through. So our tech decks are our equity multiple plays, where it's like the company's going to get this valuation, and then if how just take that valuation divided by the total number of outstanding shares, and how many, multiply that by how many shares you have for price per share, and this is how much money you're going to make. They don't even do that math for me. They literally just tell me, like, this is what the company's going to be valued in 5 years or 10 years, and I'm like, somebody in this company knows how to do math, right? Like, and then I see a boring one, and it'll have a few more numbers and a few more details, and then you get into the real estate, the commercial real estate deck, and it is just all, it's because it's a very rinse and repeat business plan, and so we have a lot of data, comps, and things like that we can say, like, we can rinse and repeat this business. We've done this before. We're going to do it again, and it's very different than the tech startup deck that is kind of like, we don't know where this could go, but it could be good. You want to try? So I think the first
yeah.
thing that somebody needs to realize when they're looking at a commercial real estate deck versus what they may be used to seeing on the tech startup side is it's just going to be a lot more data and a lot more numbers. The more proven out that business plan is, and the more data that there is, and to get ready for that, it's actually not a bad thing. More data and more numbers, and more
100%.
red ocean, less blue ocean. So I think that's some things that people kind of get bogged down in, is just the sheer volume of data that comes with real estate deals versus tech startup deals.
Correct. The calculators that we build on the real estate side are usually kind of have 3 or 4 different factors to them, right? So
Mhm.
you can change, so again, in order to challenge assumptions, right, you need to be able to know what happens if the inputs are different, and then how that will impact outputs. So we build these calculators. On the real estate side, that they'll generally have, terminal NOI, they'll have
Mhm.
exit cap rate, they'll sometimes have different rent sensitivities and stuff like that
Mm.
that you can build in. With a tech startup deal, typically it's just revenue, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like you probably could get to $2 million, $2 million revenue, and so like we'll then say, okay, like what happens if you only get to $1 million revenue? What happens if you actually get to 3 or 4? Right? And then what's the revenue multiple, right? And so like, and revenue multiples are just a complete guess, essentially, right? And so you're like, it could be a 1.5x, or it could be like a 15x.
Yeah.
So like they're going to assume their the default number might be, I don't know, a 5x, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but they allow you to say, okay, what happens in the best case scenario? What happens in the worst case scenario? And you need to be able to understand, as an LP, you need to be able to understand your upside and your downside. If you don't understand your downside, then it means that something's being hidden from you. The best, the absolute best trait that you can find in an operator, or someone that you're going to invest with, is transparency, right?
Okay.
If there are things that are hiding behind, cloud and mist, then that's a massive red flag.
Yeah.
And honestly, the one of the big reasons that people hide stuff sometimes isn't on purpose, right? Sometimes it's just because in the format that they have, there's just no way to give you all of the various different outcomes, all the different potential outcomes, right? They might give you a sensitivity table that, like, you know that is a little bit complex and difficult to read, and like has 1 or 2 factors, but they can't give you every eventuality, every potential problem that could come up, and how that will impact the returns. Like, they just can't give that all to you, because because there's too much data, like you said. And so the ability to have these inbuilt calculators and stuff that you can click into, right, that, such that it doesn't overwhelm the story, but it's still present and you can access it at any point, right? So you can click a little button that says, something like, show me my downside, or I don't know,
Yeah.
downside protection, or figure out the potential eventualities, and the deck will provide you a calculator that allows you to do that, and take all of the different eventualities. That's when information kind of goes from being a presentation to being like a really serious, comprehensive piece of information.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think the downside is taking this into some sort of large language model, whatever one that you prefer to use. Is I've just noticed that my initial, like, I have to be very careful with the way I word my prompts to not give my emotions away to the model, because what then I notice is it starts just telling me, it starts reinforcing, you're so smart. Look at the due diligence that you did. Yep, you picked up on that. That's exactly the right thing you should have been noticing. And I have to be very, very careful. And so something that's a little bit more curated through something like what you're talking about with Pulse, where it's like, it's obviously spun towards like, you should invest with me bias, but knowing that bias almost makes me more likely to be able to say, I know where you're coming from. You're a known quantity. You want me to invest, and then I'm going to explore around this. Whereas with taking a deck into a language model, I'm like, it has no agenda. I don't know. It just wants to make me look good. It wants to make me, I ask it to play devil's advocate. I ask it to convince me to invest, to not invest. Like, it's crazy how this thing can just flip on a dime and start giving me all sorts of information that I feel more confused in the first place. And so having some sort of grounding in human experience, I think is so important. And I think what you're working on is very important, because communication has changed dramatically with technology, and you're almost like you're using technology to bring it back to have more human-like communication. It's an interesting arc.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned AI and LLMs. We've avoided them like the plague, right?
Yeah.
So we've constantly been tempted to integrate LLMs into the deck, such that people can ask questions to an AI that's trained on the data within the deck, and we've avoided that. Honestly, for the exact reason that you're saying, right? LLMs have these interesting biases, and as well as hallucinations, as well as and inaccuracies and stuff. Like what you want to, if you're being told information by an AI, you gotta take it with a whole bunch of different pinches of salt.
Yeah.
Especially if someone is training that AI and prompting it on the back end as to how it should behave and respond. AIs are so smart that they're unintelligible. It's like it's kind of that
Yeah.
annoying dichotomy. And so what we basically said, exactly like you said, like, we should be using the modern day technology, but we should be using it to amplify people's stories, people's voices. Sure, we'll use it to provide evidence and do some research, but like all of the stuff that's emotionless, that's where technology is really helpful. And all of the stuff that is about emotion and about creating a story and about connecting with the investor and aligning missions and aligning visions, that's something that needs to come directly um, from the operator, from the general partner, and as it connects to the investor on a very human level. Communication, it's all about communication. It's not about technology. Technology facilitates the communication, and we'll definitely use it as an advantage, but we're not going to use it as that's not the core technology. The core technology is the communication in and of itself. And yeah, communicating clearly.
Better. Well, I mean, I wouldn't trust any LLM that was built into a product like yours, because in the background it's being manipulated to tell me to invest, and then it drifts from that original, and who knows where I ended up. So for me, it's like I cannot take the custom GPTs or any of that with any grain of seriousness. And I'll give you an example. I had a GPT that I got from a business that I was considering using, right? And this custom GPT they gave me was really good, and I was finding it to be very helpful in what it said it was going to do, and I was getting a lot out of it. And then I was like, hey, I need to take this into a little bit more of a private workspace. So I have a Gemini Pro through my Google Workspace, and it's a little bit more siloed off of. It's not training the model and things like that because I have the Pro account. So I'm like, I want to get this GPT out of where it is and bring it over into my more private workspace so I can ask it questions that have like, my personal stuff that I don't want out there in LLM land. And so I said, hey, export this custom GPT to me that I can put in as a gem over here. And I was like, as word for word as you can with proprietary information, obviously. And there's some parameters specifically for OpenAI that aren't going to attach to Gem and all to Gemini. And so, but then I'm reading through the prompt that it gave me to bring over and create a custom gem with, and it had so many calls to action to hire this business. And I was like, what? Come on. Like, I feel like all duped because all of this was going on in the background. And then I was like able to kind of see the subtle stuff. If you have more questions, maybe you should refer to this or that of stuff I hadn't bought, but maybe I needed it. Now I need this thing. And so anytime that's going to be present in when I'm considering an investment, you have to be it's very dangerous, and you have to be very aware. You have to know your model just as well as you know how to read a deck before you're going to start combining forces. So that's my word of caution to anybody listening to this who's like, I just can put it into NotebookLM and we're good to go. No. You really do need to see the biases that are built into the model itself, just like you're going to see biases built into the creator of the deck, this human who's like, you should invest with me, like understanding where those coming from. It's like listening to mainstream news that tries to put itself off as mainstream, and you're like, well, I don't think this is mainstream, right? Like they have a hidden bias, and that makes them, I think, more dangerous almost than just going to the extreme sources and aggregating for yourself. But it's a similar type of thing. So I could go on about this all day as well. Communication, manipulation, psychology, emotional drivers, information that you need to have versus what you have to have. I mean, this is a massive topic, and I don't want anybody to feel overwhelmed by any pitch deck that they open up. I think just a word of hope. There's hope out there for platforms like what you're doing, and there's hope out there that with experience, you will get better at doing this to the point where you feel confident enough to invest in things without being based on FOMO or over trusting hyperbolic claims. So it's a jungle out there, but to get into private markets, you definitely need to be able to navigate it, and you're making tools that are hopefully making that easier for investors. So I appreciate you doing the work you do and for sharing it with my listeners.
Thank you very much, Emma. I really appreciate it. If I can just kind of add a little quick call to action.
Yeah, please.
having just oh, there you go. Yeah, so it's actually pulsedex.com. Pulsecre.com will get you there as well.
Okay.
So you can really visit either. That's totally fine.
Pulsecre.com and pulsedex.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, they'll both get you to the same place. It's fine. But either way, you can kind of check out a few of our samples over there, a few different decks, and kind of see what we're doing from there. And I'm around on LinkedIn. People can find me on LinkedIn. You and I think initially interacted on LinkedIn as well. So people can find me there. Avi Solomon, AVI Solomon, like the king. And yeah, I'm always happy to speak to anyone.
All right, perfect. Yeah. I just want to kind of follow that call to action. If you are a sponsor and you need to build a deck, these types of resources out there for you. But if you're a limited partner and you feel like, oh, my guy doesn't use any of this, if you have a couple of favorite operators that you like to invest with, like just tell them like, hey, I went and checked this out. Do you want to check it out? See if it might help, because it comes from both directions. There's a push and a pull here. If you, as a limited partner, want to see better use of communication technology, you just ask for it and give feedback on the decks. I think one of the best educations I got early on when we were doing our very first deal, it was my very first limited partner ever. It's the first dollar I raised, right? And he was very experienced in the space, and he taught me as a GP how he wanted to be communicated with as an LP. And I felt like it enhanced our entire deal communication flow, because that first deal, we didn't know what we were doing, and all of our LPs were very experienced, and they were educating us on not how to run the deal necessarily, but on what types of information were important for them to have to feel like they were in touch. And so you as an LP do have a lot more influence over your sponsors than you realize. It's not like buying a stock. So just communicate what you're looking for, what you need, what was missing the last time around that you'd like to see this next time around. We really are listening. And unless we have a huge system built up and you don't really have a voice, you might have more of a voice than you realize. So these types of tools are for you to experiment with and make suggestions. And who knows, maybe you'll start getting better marketing materials in the future if you can get your favorite guys to onboard some of these resources for you to be a better LP, for them to communicate with you better. So that's my.
I will quickly mention, and I probably should have mentioned this a while ago, is simply that we don't just do pitch decks, we also do investor reports, which are an absolutely crucial thing. Especially, I mean, if you're an LP, you almost definitely know how bad reports kind of typically are. And how difficult it is to like really ascertain exactly how your investment is doing at any given point. So we do reports that enable general partners to communicate, how the deal is going and stuff like that with their investors.
Yeah, I feel the same way, because I'll have to do investor reports in a pitch deck like way, because I feel like it's more easily consumed by our LPs. But man, it's a lot of work. And so that's huge, and we should have talked about that. But if you're still listening, investor reporting, that's massive, because it's not just the first time you invest or each time you repeat invest. It's also like, how are they communicating with you along the entire process? Very key. If you don't know what's going on, it doesn't really matter how good the investment is. If you're feeling a lot of anxiety during it. So lots there. Hope you learned something. Definitely reach out to me, investwithemma.com, if you wanted to chat about any of this kind of stuff. I don't have a call to action. I just like talking about private market investing and making sure that you as a limited partner are able to pay for the adventures you want to go on through passive income. Because I noticed that the more money you make, the less like adventure and consumption there is, the more it is about like volunteering more and becoming a better person, becoming a better parent or grandparent, and starting foundations or starting a passion business that really helps makes people's life better. And so I want you to take more adventures. I want you to figure out how to pay for it, because it makes the world better for all of us to live in it together. And that's really my driving passion. So reach out to me, investwithemma.com, and we will see you next week with our next passive income adventure. Thanks again, Avi.